Okay.
Yes, sir. Go.
Welcome to the Wisdom Table, coming to you from the Grand Houses in Harlem, USA, 125th Street and Amsterdam Avenue. I'm Brother Leroy, the co-host of the Wisdom Table. This program does not reflect the views, attitudes, sentiments, or any other proclivities of the resident association of the Grand Houses, nor does this program reflect anything about the management of this NYCHA development. However, this program does reflect the research done by the participants in the program live in living color and by Zoom right on in your home. Once again, we are thankful to the Most High for blessing us with the opportunity to be with you and you to be with us. And the information that you get today, we always challenge you to check it out for yourself. Don't believe anything you hear on Wisdom Table or the communicator. But if you sit and listen, then you're obligated to go check out the references referred to in this program. Our guest today is a young brother who is one of the most popular politicians among the grassroots in New York City, and that is Assemblyman Charles Barron. Thank you for joining us there, brother.
Well, thank you for having me, Brother Leroy, and I always appreciate you bringing the information that can provide inspiration for us in our movement for liberation. So keep up the good work, my brother.
And thank you. And you knew my partner before I knew him, and that's Brother Wayne 3X Grice, who was
Oh,
saying,
yeah. Brother Wayne, man. Oh, that was my man. That was like 30, 40, 50 years ago when I was on the Lower East Side and he was with the Nation of Islam and I was messing around with the Black Panther Party. He sat me down and he gave me a lot of wisdom. Remember the program he used to be on? I think it was The Hawk.
the
He was
heart.
on some TV program for the Hawk, but he opened my eyes to a lot of things. You know, we went over the message to the black man and the Honorable Elijah's book when I was getting into eating and how to eat to live. And then he challenged me on, you know, what it is to be a man, what it is to be a woman. I'll never forget Wayne Bryce. He played an important role in my life.
Brother Wayne, and in the program that you're referring to, the Hawk, that was starring Burt Reynolds. And Brother Wayne would do the segments, and then he would be in the Lower East Side with the Muhammad Speaks newspaper.
That's right.
What was funny, he convinced me to go down there with him. That was in my territory to sell the papers. So, all right, I'll go down with you. So we worked on
Yeah.
this development, and he was on the other floor. I was on the bottom floor, and all of a sudden I heard this young Puerto Rican brother say, "Mom, Mom, the Hawk is here. The Hawk is
Ah!
here." I never. I said, "Man, he's working the building. He already got customers in, man." But
Yeah.
anyway, Brother Wayne,
Wow.
unforgettable, unbeatable.
Right, because I grew up in the public housing development called Lillian Wald. I grew up in the Lillian Wald housing developments on Avenue D and 6th Street. I spent about 30 years of my life there. My
Man.
mama is still there. Matter of fact,
Oh,
tomorrow will be her birthday and she'll be 95 years old. And she's
wow.
still in that same apartment in 890 East 6th Street in the Lillian Wald housing development.
That's the blessing, brother. That's the blessing. And
She don't want to move out of there. I can't get out of there for nothing. I said, all right, ma.
all the spirits are there. The people that she knew, they may have been gone, but she's got that rhythm. I want
That's
to
right.
start with what Brother Wayne shared with you about how to eat to live and how that impacted on your early life in terms of consciousness of diet and how it just possibly, and this is for you to attest to, you have overcome the COVID 19. It had you for a minute. Talk about that experience and what enabled you to be with us today.
Well, Brother Leroy, I put everything in God's hands. No matter what would have went down, whatever God's will was for me in my life, I was willing and ready to accept. But I thank God that He allowed me to fight it and say, I ain't going nowhere. So when I went to Brookdale Hospital, I have to give Brookdale nurses and doctors credit. They were awesome. You know, Brother Leroy, I was the first one diagnosed with coronavirus in Brookdale Hospital. When I got
Mhm.
there, no one else, had been diagnosed with that. So I was the first one, and I said, "Whew." I had 102-degree uh, temperature. I had shortness of breath, and I had pneumonia. And they wasn't sure whether the pneumonia in my lungs was from the coronavirus or something separate, and it was dealing with two things. So I was so weak, Brother Leroy, the nurses had to help me just to stand up. I couldn't
Mm.
even stand up on my own. And I just kept thinking in my mind, death never crossed my mind. The doctor came in after I was diagnosed on that Thursday. I went in Thursday for testing, and they told me it was positive on that Saturday. My wife was with me, and she eventually was positive as well. But when the doctor came in and said, "But you're not going to die, Assemblyman," I said, "Not going to die. Don't even mention death and my name in the same breath. Who you mean I'm not going to die?" I haven't even thought about that. And honestly speaking, the death never crossed my mind when I was in there, and I was pretty bad because they had me in isolation, and then they came in and they said, we just to monitor you, we want to put you in the ICU, the intensive care unit. That's when I knew I was doing bad. And when I
Yeah.
went down there, they had to give me oxygen. I wasn't on a ventilator, but they had to give me oxygen, and I had to stay there for 3, 4 days, just in the bed and not being able to get up and walk around or exercise. The best I could do is to have the nurse help me out of the bed so I can get in a chair and at least sit up. And so during that experience, I said to myself, God still has work for me to do, and there's a divine purpose for all things. And I serve a God of love and a God of justice. So let your will be done. But my will, Lord, is to get up on out of here. So that's going to be my battle. And sure enough, after a few days, things began to stabilize a bit. And my oxygen level, they were really monitoring that. So I was at 88 at one point. It went up to 92, 93 with oxygen. They wanted to get me to 95. So finally, while I was in there, and I stayed in there for 11 days, then the positive coronavirus diagnosis kept increasing tremendously. So I said to the doctors, and they said to me, "Look, there's nothing else y'all could do for me here. So let me give up my bed to somebody else and let me go home and handle this." And Brother Leroy, when my wife picked me up, she was positive at the time as well, but she didn't have no symptoms. She had little aches in her bones one time and a little out of breath when she was walking up the steps to the train station, but she didn't have any real symptoms. So when she picked me up and I came home, this is why I know the Spirit of God and the Spirit in my house and the Spirit of my African queen, wife Inez Barron, took over, because I was able to get out of the car on my own, walk up my steps. We live in a house, we're on the second floor. We walked up the steps. A day or two later, I'm walking through my house. I'm doing some exercise. So now I'm exercising, walking through my house. My I monitor everything. So my oxygen is up at 96. They wanted me at 95. You want to get to 98. I'm on 96 on my own. I
Mm.
do exercise and I'm trying to eat better. And I have a blood pressure monitor. So my blood pressure is good, 118, 120 over 70 something, 80. My blood sugar count, I'm keeping track of that. It goes 88 and 90, 100. So I'm taking care of that. My temperature on every day is like 98.1, 98.2. And so I'm feeling 1,000% better. And
Yeah.
I'm not gonna, nobody beats the coronavirus. It is beating the hell out of us, but you can survive it. And when you survive it, then we got to talk about the real pre existing conditions that is killing us even before the coronavirus. So I know I'm rushing into it, but when we get to pre-existing conditions, yes, we need to eat better. Yes, we need to exercise more and think positive. But what's really killing us is this racist, parasitic, predatory, capitalist system that's creating domestic colonies in the Black community of capitalism. We did not create unemployment. We did not create poverty. We did not create inadequate health care and miseducation and homelessness and mass incarceration. The capitalist system, with its racist ideology, created that. So once that leads to pre-existing conditions of diabetes, pneumonia, pre-existing conditions of hypertension, high blood pressure, asthma, all of that is created by an environment that this racist capitalist system created. Anybody, anybody that controls your environment determines whether you're going to live or die. We didn't bring all the fast foods into our community here in East New York. You get Wendy's, Burger King, Kentucky Fried, Popeyes, all of these stuff. We didn't bring that in. Of course, you can come back and say, well, you don't have to eat it. Yep, but when you bring in a bunch of fast food and you keep people poor and you say the burger's only $2, $3, they're going to eat it. And we shouldn't, and we should fight against it. But I'm sick of these Black politicians not criticizing capitalism and not calling for radical change, revolution of the capitalist system, and only blaming the victims for their oppression and their pain and their suffering. So yes, we need to eat better, but any analysis of the condition of Black people that excludes the oppressor will always conclude blaming the oppressed for their pain and suffering. So we have to be aware of that. So when you see politicians get on TV and they say we need to eat better, and they don't mention that capitalism needs to stop creating poverty, and we need to not pass budgets like the Democratic governor, the Democratic assembly that I'm a part of, the Democratic Senate passed a budget of $177 billion that did not address poverty, but actually cut 2.5 billion from Medicaid. At this time, the governor's a hypocrite. He's looking like he's presidential material fighting with Trump, but in his backyard, he cut Medicaid by $2.5 billion, cut 300 to 400 million from the hospitals, refused to put any capital money in for the NYCHA developments. Last year we got 400 million in, now it's zero. Mm. And one of the most egregious things they did is they rolled back some of the no cash bail reform that the law has. They rolled it back and decided to give judges more discretion to put more of us in jail. Well, the reason why we had to have a no cash bail policy is because the judges had too much discretion putting people on Rikers Island if they couldn't afford $1,000 bail, $500,000 bail, and Khalif Browder's case, $3,000 bail for what? A backpack that he didn't really rob, and he wound up coming out later and committing suicide. So how could you roll that back at this time? So putting us in incarceration at this time is really, it's a death. It's a death warrant. It's a death call. It's a death trap. Why would you put more in that? This is what this budget did. And this is what this governor did. And all of the Black and Latino elected officials that voted for a budget that did this. And here's two other pieces to it. Why would you vote for a budget that has no revenue package? Brother Leroy, all budgets have expense that they dole out, and they have a revenue package to pay for those expenses. So when you have a deficit of $10 billion, you can't just cut. You got to borrow, raise revenue, and then cut some of your expenses. This was a right-wing, conservative, what they call austerity budget that just cuts to balance the budget and raises no revenue. I had recommended strongly that we do a millionaire's tax. We would get 6, 7, 800 million, and some say 2, 3 billion. A wealth tax would bring us in a couple of billion. At what they call a pied-to-tier tax. A pied-to-tier tax is a tax on the second home of these billionaires that don't even live in the country, but they have $10 million homes in New York State. That would bring us 600 million. And this tax could even solve the problem. It's called the stock transfer tax. They transfer stocks, millions of them on Wall Street, and just a 2, 3, 4, 5 cents on those stock transfers, they actually have that tax. They collect $13 billion and then they rebate it all back to Wall Street. Collect $13 billion and rebate it all back to Wall Street. I don't think they should get anything back, but at least during this crisis, why can't we get half? 7 billion for our treasury or the treasury and 6 billion for Wall Street. That would have solved problems. Then you didn't have to flatten education and not give them any more money and cut Medicaid and cut money to the hospitals. But they had no revenue package, no tax on the rich. This was a reverse Robin Hood budget. They took from the poor to benefit the rich. The governor's a hypocrite, and every Black and Latino that voted for this should be ashamed of themselves. There were some, 17 of us in the assembly, that said no. And there was 1 or 2 Blacks in the Senate that said no and voted against this. But the rest should be ashamed of themselves. We lost that vote 61 to 80. You need 76 good votes to pass that budget. If we would have gotten 5 more, we would have defeated that budget. They would have went back to the drawing board and we could have had no more negotiations. And all of the reasons they give is a bunch of nonsense. If you keep the stock transfer tax, they're going to leave. Oh yeah, they're going to shut down Wall Street, the citadel of capitalism in the world and global capitalism. That'll never happen. Well, if you tax the millionaires, they'll leave. Then no one is leaving New York. And whoever leaves, there'll be more coming because there's a lot of money in New York. So when we have a $177 billion state budget, a $90 billion city budget under Mayor de Blasio, and you have 40% poverty in the South Bronx, 30% poverty in most of our Black and brown communities, that is the pre-existing condition that produces all of the myriad of health diseases that leads us to be vulnerable to the deadly coronavirus. This country needs a revolution.
Hey, Charles, this is the producer. Yeah, we lost Brother Leroy for a second. I was enamored of your conversation because you hit the nail right on the head. A lot of the people have decided as soon as there's a problem, as we were talking off in the beginning, it fits right in. A lot of people, when it's time to talk about doing something new, they start telling you why whoever you're going competing against is not going to go for it.
Right.
Why would they go for it? Right. Why would they go for it? This is what I always say. Why would they go for it? They're not. Of course, they're not going to go for it. You have to come with a compelling reason that makes them do it.
That's right.
And the more information that you have, the better off that you are. So if you took that information to those people, and they are like what my mother used to say when I was a kid: don't be a get along to go along person.
There you go.
My mother used to tell me that when I was a kid. Don't be like that, because you ain't going to get nowhere. You know what I mean? So you have these people. Hey, you have these people who are in there, and they're there to represent the people, and they're worried about getting along.
They're worried about
what somebody's going to say.
Yeah.
Ridiculous.
They're afraid of the speaker. They're afraid of the governor. They're afraid of the mayor. And they prioritize the party over the people. The party put them in office. The reason why we can be bold, because we're using the Democratic primary as a tactic for liberation, a strategy to dismantle eventually this racist capitalist system. So we're using it as a tactic so we can bring goods and services to our people. And we've done that, and we got to raise the contradictions of the system. So we don't get anything from the Democratic Party. We unchained, unbossed, uncontrolled. We don't have nothing to do with the Democratic Party.
Well, you remind me, there's a couple of other guests that Brother Leroy has on. He's back. I think he's back with the sounds coming on. There's a couple other guests that Brother Leroy had on. There was the scientist lady, a doctor, Dr. Bowles. And before she gives her answers about everything, she explains how she's unfettered to the system. That she doesn't work at a hospital. That she's a real truth teller. And before Brother Leroy, I just want you to comment on something since you was on a beautiful riff. I just want you to comment on the people who sit in the media, who sit in the room questioning the politicians, the mayors, the governors, the so-and-so. I noticed that they are picked people for one thing. And would you comment on the fact that, or what would you say to the fact that I've made the observation that they are there to pay their rent and they're not there to be objective and be untethered and ask the hard questions? Because if they did, they wouldn't be counting 16,000 lives by the president. But go ahead, what's your comment on that?
Well, first of all, Martin Luther King said something very, very powerful in the 1960s, around 1968. He said the white power structure picks these Black leaders and gives them prestigious positions and resources, and the Black masses becomes angry at them for not delivering. And he said they have a right to be angry at these manufactured leaders who are picked by the white power structure, picked by the Democratic Party. And these are people that they will definitely be in control of. So they know, and I spoke to some of them afterwards, they know that was wrong. They said, Brother Barron, I know, but I had to do what I had to do. No, you didn't. You there to serve the people, not the party, not the speaker, not the governor, and not your personal ambition. See, capitalism has a value system. More than it being a politically and economic oppressive system, it has a value system. And that value system is rugged individualism. Look out for number one, to each his own. Crabs in the back. Survival of the fittest.
Could I just interrupt you? I just want to say that, and Brother Leroy's back. When I entered into graduate school, our economics professor asked everybody in the class, did they know what the definition of capitalism was? And people went around the room, was using all these Keynesian theories and all this. And he shut everybody down. He said, capitalism is screw the other guy before he screws you.
Yeah, simple.
Go ahead, Charles.
That's right. It's a profit-making system. So these are they're into personal ambition, rugged individualism, the party over the people, because that'll get them where they want to go, and greed over need. They support people who are greedy and want to hoard all of the wealth. The top 10% and the 90% is struggling working class people. So we just need to develop a independent, Black, radical political movement to take out what I call Black neo-colonial puppets of the Democratic Party. We did that in East New York. We went up against.
That again, man. You need that again, man, because those handkerchief. I remember that speech. I think they call them handkerchief heads.
Yeah,
or something like that. Look at that shot of Brother Leroy's ear.
Okay.
Look at that. He got his ear. That's a beautiful shot, Brother Leroy. Your ear is like in this shot. It's beautiful. Go ahead, Charles. I'm sorry, man.
I'm ready to go back to Brother Leroy.
Go ahead, Leroy.
Brother Charles, for the uninitiated, And I'm talking about the uninitiated being those of us who have not gotten a taste of our culture by way of reading of who and what we have been in terms of our DNA, historical DNA. What have you learned? What have you learned about our culture, about Black people's culture before it comes under the European domination? What do you know of that you can share with us, our constituency, that says it is opposite of the raw capitalism that we have been victims of here in the wilderness of North America?
Brother Leroy, that is an excellent, excellent question. And one of the things I've been saying across the country when I travel and speak is that we as an African people, of course, we're resilient and we have a powerful African spirit, but we in Africa, before the coming of the European, we had a system called communalism. As a matter of fact, the system of African communalism is the ancestor to socialism because it was more of prioritizing the community over the individual. So under African communalism, if you could just think, when I said that whoever controls your environment controls whether you're going to live or die. So when we were in Africa before the European, we had a sense of communalism, community. If you just listen to the name of systems, communalism, community, socialism, people, communism, community, people, capitalism, money, feudalism, power, fighting for money, slavery, oppression for maximizing profits, mercantilism, profit making, imperialism, power, profit. But when you think of our system, so when we were in Africa, we didn't have a sense of people getting wages. This is ancient Africa, people getting wages and people hoarding things and exploiting workers. So if you were a hunter and you went out hunting for food, you did that for the village, not for yourself to be hoarding some food in some place and say, come on, give me your calorie, give me your money, and whatever, so you can buy my food. No, you contribute that food for the community. If you were a seamstress, knew how to make clothing, you made it for the community because you're going to be eating a hunter's food. If you were a medicine person, a woman or a man, you did that for the community. So you healed all of us. And we were healthier then, dealing with our roots, not just our historical roots, but roots coming from the earth that kept us very, very healthy. And if you were a teacher, you taught the community. You didn't get paid for that. There were no wages and all of that. This was a communal way of life. And then as we advanced, so-called, and people started getting wages and work. And then when the European came, now think of that environment that I just spoke of, and a child being raised up in that kind of environment, looking at royalty and looking at kings and queens and princesses, and that which came to the earth was for the development of the human spirit, the human being, and kept all of us healthy. We had rites of passage programs where you knew about what it was to be a man and a woman at 12 and 13 and 14. And when you looked up to the people of the village, you were proud because you saw people in royal garb and you said kings, queens. Then came the European. So your whole environment changed. Now you're being captive and you're held in so-called slave castles on the shores of Africa. What kind of environment was that? What kind of food were you eating then? What kind of clothing did you have on then? How did your people look, then? How did the mothers and fathers that you thought was great, what happened with them? They were looking weak to you now because they were packed like sardines in these so-called slave castles. and the whole environment changed. That's why Dr. Clark said it and said it well. Never start your history on where the boats dropped you off. You start your history from where the boats picked you up from. That was Africa. And before the European came, you gave the world astrology, astronomy. You gave the world the pyramids and the mighty Sphinx and the rock-hewn churches of Ethiopia. These were wonders of the world. You're the one, Imhotep, who taught the world about medicine and Pythagoras' theorem. No, Africa dealt with mathematics before that. That's your history before the European. I don't like when we start off our history in slavery. I don't like that museum in Washington, D.C. that starts off in slavery and doesn't show you the greatness of Africa before the European. But after the European came, our environment changed on the shores of Africa. Then your environment changed even more when you got on the so-called slave ships. And I say so-called because we're not slaves, we were enslaved Africans. But the so-called slave ships. So during the Ma'afa, the Middle Passage, what kind of environment was that? Packed on top of each other, getting all kinds of diseases, leaving in, sitting in your waste, your solid and your liquid waste, and women not having no sanitation, stuff. And just look at that. And some of us said, before I'd be a slave, I'd be buried in my grave and jump across the ship into the ocean. That Ma'afa, they say 2 to 10 million people of us died during that journey. And Africa was depopulated by the millions because I call it the transatlantic slave raid. They try to make it think it was some trade that Africans sold us into slavery. Yes, some did, just like we got some sellouts now. But most of it was done by Europeans. And we should never let them off the hook because some of our brothers may have sold some of us into slavery, and some debate that, but they did it with a different concept of slavery. That's a whole nother discussion. But that environment was unhealthy. Then you arrive on the shores of South America and Brazil, on the shores of the West Indies, on the shores of North America, and you become enslaved on plantations, another environment, the plantation environment, long ways from rites of passage programs to the plantation. So the child begins to see us being whipped, and you eat the worst food, as Malcolm said, pig guts, and you live in the worst quarters, packed like sardines again. And so that environment is conducive for bad health. And God forbid if any virus came at that time, most of us would have died because of the pre-existing condition of racism, capitalism, slavery, and colonialism, and its neo-colonial black puppets. Then, after the so-called emancipation or the so-called 13th Amendment that abolished slavery, except as a punishment for crime, which means it allowed slavery in the state penitentiary. So we went from the plantation to the penitentiary. And then when you got into the rural communities of the South and the urban communities of the North, these were domestic, neo-colonial, and colonial communities. The concept of colonialism is when you're the majority in your community, yet every cultural institution, every social institution, every piece of the economy, the land, the means of production, the police department is controlled by people outside of your community. That's how our Black communities look in the South and the North. We're not free. So we're in a domestic colonial situation. In that setting, you have the worst food, the worst housing, unemployment, all those stuff we mentioned before. We didn't create that. The capitalists did. The racist capitalists did. So, of course, if a virus comes, you're going to be most vulnerable. So now that it's here and we're dying more than anybody else, we don't need no commission set up, a task force that the mayor puts his wife in the head of because she's running for borough president later. We need you to just send the resources. Send the mask, send the food, send the staffing to the hospitals. Why would you put a boat in Manhattan with 1,000 beds and they only use 200-300 of them? And you have no boat for East New York, no boat for Harlem, no boat for Brownsville, no boat for the South Bronx, no boat for Jamaica or the places in Queens where we live. Why would you turn the Javits Center into a place where people could put some beds and be taken care of in the white communities? And Central Park in the white community. And all of this stuff is done, and here we are dying more in East New York and Brownsville and Bed-Stuy and Harlem and East Elmhurst and all these places. We got places you can put a boat. We got parks that you can set up beds with. See, that's some of the capitalistic racist exploitation. Later for some task force, just send the resources. We already know what the statistics are. What do you have to think about or talk about or meet about? Send the resources and send them now.
Hey, Charles, this is just Doug again, the producer. Do you think that, in that vein, do you think the 26 million people who lost their job over 6 weeks, do you think that exemplifies or shows some of the holes in capitalism when that many people can lose their job that quickly?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, this coronavirus may put the nail in capitalism's coffin. As a matter of fact, if you remember back in the 15th, 14th century, when feudalism in Europe was the system, and feudalism had, and the Europeans, they had the slaves were the serfs and the peons, and then the king had all of the land and he shared it with the lords and the bishops, and the knights were the military to protect the land for the king. And that's where the word landlord came from, because they gave some land to the lords, the king did, to protect them. And they had the serfs, the slaves, dealing with agriculture. And because of the inability for the king and the lords to do it right, feudalism was in a crisis. And then came, remember the bubonic plague? The bubonic plague came, a third of the Europeans died, and feudalism as a system collapsed and was destroyed. Now let's come forward. Capitalism, prior to this disease, prior to this virus, capitalism was in a crisis. They don't want you to know that. Capitalism was in a crisis because there were liberation movements all across the world rising up and taking power in Cuba and Venezuela and some African countries all over the world. People were rising up and saying no to imperialism and global capitalism. And so in the United States, remember, it used to be a creditor nation. Now it is a debtor nation. The United States has over $21 trillion worth of debt. They had to print money and lower interest rates. Some of the interest free loans and 2 and 3% interest rates, because capitalism was failing. It was failing. And as a matter of fact, Obama used Keynesian economics to try to use the public sector money to bail them out. Remember, he bailed out Wall Street to $700-800 billion because Wall Street was collapsing. Capitalism was dying. And they say, you don't want no government intervention when they're making money. When they're making money, they adhere to Adam Smith and classical economics, like no government intervention, the free market, the private owners of land. We will take care of our own problems. Stay out of our business. Then when they were collapsing and broke, socialism, come on, give us that money, bail us out. So it's socialism when you're struggling, and it's capitalism
Too big to fail.
Money.
Too big to fail.
So that's what's happening. So now when you have capitalism fallen before this virus, now when it hit, it's really crippling capitalism, which is why they want to open up so many states even before it's safe. And the people that's going to be hurt most is us because of the capitalist ideology of racism. And remember, racism is an ideology. The system is capitalism. So we're going to suffer because we're the ones that have those small businesses, and the more small business money is not coming to our businesses. It's coming to these chain stores that have millions. I saw on TV the other day, the LA Lakers got 4 or 5 million. What the Lakers doing with 4 or 5 million? Small businesses is where we need to have that money come into our communities, because the small businesses and mom and pop stores, those are the ones that keep our communities going. So if capitalism falls, we just got to look out and make sure it doesn't fall on our head. And that's why the Nation of Islam and Minister Louis Farrakhan, they have a very good idea about separation. They have a very good idea about building a nation within this nation. That is something that should be seriously considered. And for those who want to fight, like I do, for the total liberation of Africa, because Africa is central to our liberation of all the Africans in the diaspora, we need to begin to fight for the liberation of Africa under a more communalistic and socialistic system, so that Africa's resources can be for the brothers and sisters in Africa and for all the dispersed Africans in the diaspora, us all over the world. I believe in every crisis is an opportunity. We will survive the coronavirus. We will survive just like I survived. We are going to survive it. We've been wounded deeply, badly, but we're going to survive it. And when we come out of this, don't just fight against racism and say you want inclusion into this system, because that's what you do. If you say, hey, this system's racist, you have 43 presidents and not one black, okay, we'll give you one, Barack Obama, our boy, our guy. And the system stays the same. Hey, we don't have any CEOs on Wall Street. All right, we'll give you the head of Time Warner, give you a black CEO. Hey, we don't have any black governors, any black mayors. We'll give you some black governors. We'll give you some black mayors. Hey, we don't have any elected officials across the board that are black. Well, we have 13,000 now. Look at this, Brother Leroy, right here in New York. We have a black head of the assembly. We have a black head of the Senate. We have 30, 40 black and Latino and Asian representatives in the 150 Senate. We have 13, 15 blacks in the Senate, and rather the Assembly, and 13, 15 blacks in the Senate. Of the 51 city council members, 26 are black, Latino, and Asian. Blacks and Latinos make up 54, 52% of New York City's population. Add the Asians, it's like 62%. We have a black attorney general. We have a black head of the Democratic Party in Brooklyn. We have a black head of the Democratic Party in Manhattan. We have a black head of the Democratic Party in Queens. We have a Latino head of the Democratic Party in the Bronx. And we got as much poverty as we ever had, much unemployment as we ever had, passing budgets that the white man wants passed, that the governor wants passed, that the mayor wants passed. We don't have power. Black visibility is not black power. Black faces in high places is not black power. So we gotta fight for black power, authentic black power. We gotta own and operate with independent black radicals all of the cultural, social, economic, political institutions in our community, so we can control the destiny of our communities. And separation, a nation within a nation, is a valuable option. In the meantime, we need black radicals like my wife and I, Sister Inez in East New York, we wiped out the puppets, the black puppets of the Democratic Party. We wiped them out. We destroyed that party. In every black community, in every Latino community in New York, there's a black Democratic Party club that's controlling the local politics. All politics is local. The power, the revolution is going to start from the bottom up. You can fight and talk about Trump all you want and have Trump be trumpetized. People say, Charles, you got to go with Biden because we got to stop Trump. I said, well, give me a reason to go with Biden and don't mention Trump. And don't mention that he was vice president with Barack Obama. Give me a reason. The guy shut up. So we got to start from the bottom up. I think that's where revolution begins. And what we did in East New York, because I won the city council seat in 2001, my wife won the assembly seat in 2008. We are also the female and male district leaders. We have control over the community board. We have the county committee. We have the judicial delegates in that area of East New York and the 60th Assembly District and the 42nd Council District. And because of that, we were able to bring in the renovate 4 parks, $17 million. We have 10 to 12,000 units of housing, and it's affordable based upon our definition of affordability. The area median income, the AMI, that's how they gentrify you. If the AMI, the area median income, HUD says 80% of New York City's area median income is affordable. New York City's income, area median income, is like 90-something thousand dollars for a family of 3. 80% of that is 70-some odd thousand dollars. I told this developer, he came in my neighborhood, he said, I want to build affordable housing. And I'm going to use HUD's definition and build affordable housing for you in your district. I said, no, you're not. Do you know my neighborhood AMI? He said, no, this meeting's terminated. You don't know my neighbor, you go find out and I'll reschedule the meeting. He came back a week later and he said, well, $36,000 for a family of 3. So nothing you're building is affordable. But the reason why, Brother Leroy, I was able to do that, because I was the local city council member and he could not get that project passed unless I said yes. The Black Panther, the revolutionary, the no tie wearing militant. Unless I say yes, he can't build. So if I say no, the chairperson of the land use committee is going to call me up. There's a project coming in your district. Do you want it, council member? No, I don't. Okay, no problem. That project's dead. That's a little bit of power, just a little taste. If Donald Trump comes into my beloved East New York and says he wants to build Trump Towers on Blake Avenue because it's city-owned land, he has to see the Black Panther. And I'll tell him, you're fired. You're not getting nothing. And if I say no, my committee's going to say no, and the powerful, rich Donald Trump can't build.
Could I ask you a question, Brother Leroy?
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so I took a look at, I just want to get your thoughts. We took a look at the notion of vouchers for education now that people are doing remote learning. So I found out that New York City spends $25,000 per pupil to educate a pupil every year. Boston spends $22,000, and the average is $12,000. So do you think that having vouchers so that people could take control, because $25,000 is a nice chunk of change to homeschool and educate your kids. What do you think about something like that?
You asking me or Brother Leroy?
No,
I was asking you that.
Oh, no, I'm not for vouchers. I think that's a conservative notion. That I'm for public education, charter schools, vouchers, all that takes away from public schools educating our children. I fight against, because I think they use that. And I know some Black people might feel, hey, I want choice and all of that, but you don't have choice when you go into these charter schools. So vouchers and charter schools are more of a way of privatizing public education, using public money. If people want to privately, uh, you know, educate their children, they certainly have that choice. But the public school should be built, protected, because under this capitalist system, everything is for profit. And whatever they can do for profit, they do. The charter schools in Harlem, run by a former city council member, white woman, she's making 400,000 or 500,000 a year, and telling black parents, you should have a choice. Don't let them tell you not to give you no money for charter schools. So it's always a battle in our communities around charter schools. But the bottom line, many of those charter schools are run by hedge funds. Hedge funds, these rich people are behind it. They set up these not-for-profits to make it appear that they have nothing to do with it. Then they get as much they can from the public school system. Charter schools get billions of dollars in this state, and it's your tax-paying dollars paying these private entities. And they confuse you by saying they're public charters. That's a contradiction. Charter schools are private, even if it's a not-for-profit. If it's not owned by the city or the state, then it's owned by a private entity. So I'm not for vouchers. I'm not for charter schools. I think we should revolutionize the education system. There's 1.1 million of our children in there. Charter schools at best take care of 100,000 of our children at best. Vouchers will take care even less. So we cannot take away from the 1 million to support 100,000. And I think public education, we just have to fight, because some of these public schools really need improvement. And that's where our struggle should be waged, where most of our children are, in the public school system. And I grew up in the 60s, and we had independent Black institutions like Uhuru Sasa in the East with Brother Ghcr.Nyc, may he rest in peace, and Shule Mapanduze. These were independent Black. I support those schools, and they didn't take money from the school system to build those schools. They went by way of tuition. It was difficult, it was challenging, but I support public education. Oh, her name, by the way, was Eva Moskowitz. I couldn't think of it. She used to be in the city council with me, and she has a lot of these schools up in Harlem and other places, and she's making big money off of the charter school movement.
How would you, how would you improve those schools, the public school system? How would you make it more, more centered towards the actual kids and their parents?
Several things. I would first and foremost have a culturally relevant curriculum. I think the curriculum needs to change radically. And I think we should have the power in our communities to change that curriculum. It's about power. It's always about power. That's what the Ocean Hill-Brownsville fight was about in Brooklyn years ago, with Brother Ghcr.Nyc, Al Van, and Sonny Carson, and Milton Galamison, and all of those that were involved in that. It was about power. We want control over our schools. That's our taxpaying dollars. So I would fight for community control over the school system. I spoke to the chancellor about that. He's open for the idea. He's open for us having more control over our local schools. I would have local school councils that would consist of teachers, community leaders, and parents running each school, determine who the principal is going to be, what the curriculum is going to be like, and who the teachers are going to be. We have to take control over our schools. So it's about power to determine those things. I would have smaller class size. I would have an open classroom setting where children can grow and learn at their own pace, and not just have a grading system. Everybody's in the third grade and on the third grade level, and you're sitting there with a child that's ready for sixth grade work in a third grade classroom. So you'd have to have a radical changing in teaching. And then I would have more Black male and female teachers. There's not enough. in the 1.1 million. I would end the specialized high school test and I would go by grade point average, and I would guarantee in 7 to 8%. I agree with the mayor and the chancellor on this, that we would take people from every school, every middle school to populate the specialized high schools. And quite frankly, I would get rid of specialized high schools eventually, and every school should be specialized. Every student should be specialized. I believe in egalitarian education and not elitist education.
And Charles, the point about the specialized education, I relate what they call the talented and gifted school, um, the adopted community, but not every school has talented and gifted. All the children are talented and gifted, and that sets up an elitism, a fake
Right.
elitism system. But my phone has been going off and on, so I want to give you three questions or three areas to hit in case my phone goes out. One is a person is going to, who hears this program, is going to a community board meeting next month, and affordable housing is going to be the subject. Give give us how that individual can be forearmed with knowledge so that he and she doesn't automatically rubber stamp someone coming before the group and saying they're going to do affordable housing. So we need the math calculation on that. The other thing is guiding our young people into away from being diluted by this learning at home. In other words, a lot of us are not doing it. A lot of us are being told that we're going to pass anyway, so we don't have to study, that we don't have to read, that we don't have to write. And the third thing is your love of Black people. Where do you trace it to? So those are three areas.
Well, first, in terms of affordable housing at community boards, once again, I think we got to fight for structural change. The community boards have no power. The community boards are advisory boards. The borough president's board is the next step in what they call the ULUP, the Uniform Land Use Review process for a project has to go through. It goes to the community board, that's advisory. Then it goes to the borough board, the borough president's board, advisory. Then it goes to city planning, which is the mayor's agency. If the planning commission wants it, then it comes to the city council where the power is. That's why I ran for city council. So the city council can modify the project, reject the project, or accept it as it is. So when communities hear a project is coming into their neighborhood, get to your city council member. Because even if the community board says they don't want it, as they did in the northern part of my district where council member Espinal was, and the mayor had 6,000 units coming in, and 80% of them were market, and the other 20% we could hardly afford. The community board said no. The borough board said no, but the mayor convinced the council member to say yes, and the project came in. So we have to understand power. And then to understand a project, do your research, do your homework. You got to find out what AMI means, area median income. And if you see that thing is not matching the neighborhood's area median income, you're going to be gentrified. If a project comes in for 1,000 units and 80% of them are market for people making $100,000, you're going to be gentrified. And if 20% is for people making 60 and 70,000 and your neighborhood AMI is 36,000, you can't afford to get in there. You're going to be gentrified. In my neighborhood, our Black population increased and the white population decreased. In my council district and my wife's council district and my assembly district, It's 90% Black and Latino, 70% Black and 20% Latino and Latina. I don't know what to say now, but it's that is like that because in the last 20 years, we didn't allow for any project to come in that wasn't meeting the incomes of 25,000, 35,000, 45,000 household incomes. And we have no market apartments. So in the 10,000 units that we signed off on, not one is market. Where could you go in this city, have an income of $35,000 to $45,000 and get a one-bedroom apartment for $750 a month, a two-bedroom apartment for $800, $900 a month, a three-bed apartment for $900 to $1,100 a month, a studio for $500,000, $600,000 a month? Where could you go and get that? That's what we accomplished in East New York. And we made developers do community benefits agreements with our community organizations. So to keep it affordable, you got to study. You got to come in there armed with information. So when they come and show you the beautiful pictures and they show you how great the housing is going to look, and when they tell you how many jobs it's going to create, and when they tell you, and we'll even build a park and a school for you, look at the AMI. The affordability is based upon the area median income and determine if that matches the AMI of your neighborhood. On learning at home, remote learning, it's a big problem. First of all, a lot of many of our homes don't have the tabloids yet, don't have the computers yet, and some are having Wi-Fi challenges. And then even after you do all of that, then you got to have the challenge of how they're going to mark papers and mark things and what kind of marking system they're going to have. All of that's being discussed now, but it's very, very challenging for our people to do that kind of learning. So I think that has to be watched very closely. I know my wife, she's an expert in the field of education, and she's been on it with the chancellor and on it with some of the groups that have been having Zoom meetings regarding this issue. So she's far more of an expert on that one than I am. And then your last question about the level of love that I have for my people. I love African people. I love all humanity, but I especially love African people. And I think the beautiful thing about growing up in the 1960s is that we had a cultural revolution. We learned to battle against self-hatred. We learned to love our coarse hair. We learned to love our full lips and love our ebony complexions and our broad noses. And when we said Black power, we did the Black, but we didn't get the power. We got to get the power in the 21st century, but we did the Black. And many of us changed our names to African names. I have an African name that a brother gave me, and it's Shomari Baruti. Shomari Baruti is my African name. I use it from time to time. Eventually, I'm going to legally change it and be Shomari Baruti. It means forceful teacher. I don't mean forceful in the sense of brute force, but forceful in the sense of persuasive and convincing. So we changed our names. We wore dashikis, we wore African, garb, and we designed clothing, and we went to African schools, Shule Mapanduze and the East, and we learned about our culture. We fought for Black history on college campuses. There was a whole Black history movement fighting for college campuses. We had African weddings. And so we were fighting against cultural imperialism and having our African culture and identifying with our continent. And most importantly, identifying with the continent of Africa. No, we don't know which state we came from in Africa, which tribe and all of that. Oh yeah, I'm light, brown skin or whatever, and have hair is a mixture of white and African, but we are an African people, and we have an identity crisis. because some people say, oh, I'm not African, I'm American, or I'm a Black American, or I'm Nubian, or I'm, we have all kinds of identities. So we have to come to some unanimity of identity. I know one thing that Dr. Clark said, that when the boats picked us up from Africa, stole us from Africa, everybody on that boat was an African. And it may have been different tribes, different languages, different religions, but we were all Africans. And then when they dropped you off in America, you came an African American or American. And when they dropped you off in the Caribbean, you became something else. And when they dropped you off in South America, you became something else. But our original identity was an African people. So in the 60s, there was so much political awareness and cultural awareness that you begin to love yourself and love your people. And then revolutionaries, as Che Guevara said, is motivated by love, not hate. So the more you see your babies dying and you see the suffering and your elderly being treated so badly, and you see the self-destructive behavior that we engage in because of our internalization of our oppression amongst our youth sometimes, it just pains me so much because of my deep, profound love for my people. That's what the Black Panther Party taught me to love my people. That's what Wayne Grice taught me from the Nation of Islam, to love my people. And that's what I grew up in. And that's why I love my people so much, no matter what. And some of them, they make it hard for you to love, but I love them all, no matter what they're doing.
Charles Barrett.
And also,
on behalf of, go ahead.
Can I just add this? I don't want to leave this out. We cannot forget our political prisoners of war. Some of them are been in there for 30, 40 years because they rose up and fought against this system. And we can't forget, we got to free them all. We thank God that Herman Bell is out, and thank God that Sekou Abinga is out, and Seth Hayes came out. May he rest in peace. We're fighting to get Jalil Montagum out. We're fighting to get Muya Abu Jamal, who just celebrated his 66th birthday. So we got to fight to free our political prisoners of war, free them all. And on the move, I thank God for Pan Africa and the brothers and sisters from the MOVE organization, John Africa, and all of them for their commitment. And some of them are coming out as well. But we got to continue to fight to free our political prisoners of war. I'm sorry.
Wow.
Mutulu Shakur.
No.
I spoke to Mutulu today. Mutulu Shakur, who's Tupac's father. Well, some say stepfather, but I don't agree with that step stuff. He's a father figure for Tupac Shakur, and he's been down for a long time. I just spoke to him today, and he's fighting cancer. And here he is fighting cancer in prison for all of this time. He's calling me up to find out how I'm doing, because he knew I was affected by the coronavirus. And now that's not a brother that loves you.
Yes.
SF Tulu, you asking me how I am? How you doing, brother? So we had a great conversation. Omawale Clay had a chance to say some things to him, but we got to free Mutulu and all of the prisoners who are political prisoners of war. So I say free them all.
Okay, Charles Barron. On behalf of Brother Leroy, because he always says this to everybody that he does the show with. So now, so he's having a little problem with his phone, as he said. I just want to say on behalf of you, thank you for coming on, and once again giving a great lesson on the culture, the politics, the power, and the solution, and some solutions as well, as you always do. And you truly are a professor, elite. So on behalf of Brother Leroy, I want to say God bless you and your family, and hope that you come back again and continue your series of lectures to help us to be smarter, man.
Well,
Appreciate
I
that.
am honored and humbled before both of you. You don't know how important your program is. I've seen it on several occasions, and I saw that sister you were talking about on the program just a little while ago. She was awesome. So you keep up the good work, because information is inspiration toward our liberation.
Thank you, man. And remember everybody, if you tune into the next show, you just might learn something. Thank you, Charles Barron.
Thank you, brother.